afternoon. Thank you all very much for joining us. I am Dr. Audrey Russick, the Food and Wine Archivist here at the UC Davis Library. And I'm excited that all of you could join us for this incredible opportunity to once again welcome the legendary wine writer, Hugh Johnson, to campus. Thanks in a large part to Hugh's donation of his papers, which are part of the Warren Winiarski Wine Writer Collection, we are proud to have the greatest wine library in the world right here at UC Davis. Our wine library supports our programs in grape growing and winemaking, as well as those in the wine industry, particularly in the nearby regions of Napa and Sonoma. And while we are here today to talk about wine, we are also working to build our special collections on food and agriculture to the same caliber in order to establish a food and wine center here at the library. So our wine writer collections are a cornerstone of our food and wine archives, which we continue to grow to ensure that UC Davis is an unparalleled, top-tier research library for these subjects. We've had scholars from as far away as Germany and Australia to do research using the materials we have here, and we look forward to having many more. So our food and wine collections, including Hugh's, further the university's reputation as the leading academic research institution in agriculture, food science and culture, and of course, viticulture and enology. So it is now my privilege to introduce our interim university librarian, Bill Garrity, who will share more about Hugh's legacy and his extraordinary gift of the Hugh Johnson Archives.
Anyway, thank you, Audrey, and welcome, friends. I get to introduce Hugh Johnson, the world's best-selling author in wine. Hugh, it is a super pleasure to have you back to campus, and thank you for coming. For those of you who aren't familiar with the arc of Hugh Johnson's illustrious career, he has been writing about wine for more than 50 years. He started out writing for magazines like Vogue and House and Garden, and became the wine and food editor for the Sunday Times in London. His career really took off in 1966 after he published his first book titled Simply Wine. He went on to write several more books, including the one for which he is arguably best known, The World Atlas of Wine, which is now in its 8th edition and has sold more than 4 million copies in 14 languages. But for all of his achievements, he is dearest in the heart of us for his vision, generosity, and partnership in helping us build a world-class wine writers collection. To complement Audrey's remarks, we define wine writers to include wine authors, editors, journalists and critics, bloggers, and other editorial wine content creators. The library collects their work because they provide a unique insight on the history of wine in California, America, and globally. As our renowned friend and Napa winemaker Warren Winiarski has said, wine writers don't write just about the regions or types of wine. They helped develop the wine industry itself. They influenced the aesthetics of wine, and they provided insights into the people and places that make wines what they are. While we have held the works of some of the early wine writers of the mid-20th century for quite some time, it was really Hugh's donation of his archive in 2016 that moved us to a whole new level, and we are forever grateful to him. His papers, along with those of other leading wine writers he has introduced us to over time, like his fellow British wine writer Jancis Robinson, have become the cornerstone of a wine writing archive that has blossomed into a signature library initiative. Hugh, we are proud to be the home of your archive, and we are absolutely delighted to have you back here on campus. Before we hear from Hugh, however, I want to recognize our forever colleague, Mackenzie Smith, and Stephen, who just retired only 3 months ago as university librarian. She was absolutely fundamental in making us what we are in food and wine, and we are forever grateful to you. Thank you. And now I get to turn the mic over to you, so you can tell us of your story of the career about wine and winemaking and what that has meant to you. So thank you again.
Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction. I'm not sure whether I'm a long way from you or you're a long way from me, but there seems to be a bit of a hole in the middle. Anyway, I hope you can see me and I hope you can hear me. And I want to just start by saying that I'm thrilled to be back here. And people have said to me, well, why UC Davis? When I was disposing of all the paper. And we moved house about 10 years ago from a large house in the country in Essex in England. And when I went up to the attic and saw the amount of bump there was up there, I thought, oh dear, where is this lot going to go? And then I looked around at the possible libraries, universities in Europe, for example. I mean, Bordeaux, Dijon have great libraries and so on. But they're not that interested. They don't speak English, for one thing. And it just seemed to be very clear that Davis has what I have since discovered to be, frankly, the world's greatest wine library. I thought I'll go for that. That's where I would like my stuff to live. And Davis has very graciously said, fine, we'll make a bit of room for it. So there is a lot here, and I'm afraid there may be even more to come in due course. Why did I start writing about wine is a question that I think might occur to a few people. The answer is, but I didn't. I started as a fashion journalist, if you like. My career started on Vogue magazine, and I was caught up with Condé Nast and their magazines, House and Garden included, and I was asked to write about wine for Vogue and House and Garden. Why? I didn't push it. I just sort of suggested it. I said that you cover so many of the pleasures of life, but you've left one out, and it's a great one. And so I wrote my first article about wine so long ago, and I realized that the great trick is to make people want to read it. And if I had just stuck to the subject of wine, what reader of Vogue or House of Garden would have been bothered with it? So I had to make it as funny as I could, or as anecdotal, make it in some way appealing to the reader. And that has actually been my personal and professional watchword all the time. I remember some editor writing to a racing journalist, unwant the dull technical race stuff. So I thought, unwant. The unwant is what readers do. They say, oh no. Even in the field of wine, is it 85 or 87% Cabernet Sauvignon? Who cares? That's not what people want to know. And they've got to be drawn, seduced into wanting to know anything. So it is it's the writer's job, I think, to find the way in to get readers to come closer and engage. Anyone who can write a readable sentence is already lucky, I think, because a lot of people can't. And if you're lucky enough, if God's given you the gift of stringing a few words together, then you're ahead of the game. And I've always loved write about anything. As I just mentioned, I started with fashion journalism and that kind of thing. Then I sort of spread my wings a bit and became a travel writer. Now, you don't need any skill to be a travel writer. You just have to go places and say what you found. And I loved doing that. Then I found a lot of the nicest places I went, and most interesting, and most beautiful, and greediest with good food too, were wine growing areas. So it became quite attractive to specialize in where people make wine. And it became a habit which has served me in good stead. where was the first? I think really Bordeaux has always been the place where it's most it's sort of to us Brits, it is wine really. We have been shipping the wines of Bordeaux since the Middle Ages or earlier, or even Roman times, and Bordeaux and wine is just synonymous practically. So that was a good place to start. And not just going there and researching it, but obviously enjoying it and making friends there, and making a thing of the journey itself. Now, in about the early 70s, a good friend of mine called Tony Lathwaite started a mail order business, a wine mail order business called Bordeaux Direct, which is, after a number of years, a number of decades now, has become the biggest wine mail order business on earth. And I can't remember the year, but Tony and I both love the sea and sailing, and we thought how wonderful it would be to replay and reproduce the medieval wine voyage from Bordeaux to England. For hundreds of years, Bordeaux was under the English crown, and it was a part of our territory. We couldn't make wine much in England, and the entire Bordeaux crop was destined for the English market in quantities that nobody now would believe. If you look at the statistics, in the late 14th century, there was enough Bordeaux shipped to England, and that's not just to London or to Bristol or the obvious ports, but every little port round the coast sent out a boat to load up in Bordeaux. Hundreds of these little boats, fishing boats, were bringing back their barrels of wine. And the wine in those days had to be drunk very young, because it wouldn't keep. There was no way. When the Dutch brought sulphur into the game, many centuries later, that changed the game. But wine was going to oxidize very rapidly. And the great game was to ship it as quickly as you possibly could. The word claret has been, by which we Brits mean the wine of Bordeaux. It's been current for 700 years or so. And why do we call it claret? Because it was clear. This is my theory. There are other ideas about this. But when the wine was just being brought to the market, probably from the vineyard, it was examined to see whether it would be shippable, and shippable by Christmas. This is the idea. I mean, if you have the vintage in September, then you haven't got long to get it over the sea and to the market. So they chose the clearest wine, which had fallen bright and wasn't murky, because if it had too much stuff in it, it wouldn't survive the voyage. So my theory is that claret was about clarity. Was about clarity. And there was this enormous demand for it. I mean, the supplies would have given every man, woman and child several magnums every year. Yeah, more than that, I think. It was vast. And when King Edward I was waging war on Wales and building those super castles that he built, some astonishing buildings he built there, the wine supply for the troops alone was almost the whole Bordeaux crop. It was absolutely massive. Well, it's dwindled, I'm afraid. It's rather dwindled these days. We can't get through that much. Besides that, the price has gone up, and besides that, it's heavily taxed. But we are enthusiastic, and our enthusiasm has led to the different grades that are so important. Red Bordeaux is Red Bordeaux. I think it's one of the world's best drinks. It has all the qualities, if it's not overmade. I mean, I like red wines like that without any flavour of oak. As soon as you put them in the oak barrel, you're making them into something more serious than just a drink. You're developing complexities in them, you're aging them in a different way, you're leading to a different rate of the slow oxidation of the wine, and you're turning it into something that will conceivably become luxurious and a different matter. If you're talking about the basic drink, then it is as untreated as you can possibly make it. It's as natural as you can possibly make it, and you drink it as quick as you can. Something as desirable as that is obviously going to inspire people to upgrade and upgrade and upgrade. And that was not easy when it was a sort of hand-to-mouth business. But it really became possible when that brilliant invention came along, the wine bottle. Now you think the wine bottle had to be invented, and it took a very long time. Although it's true that the ancient Romans had wine bottles, and even kept them, and even laid them down. We don't know much about it, really. There is a Roman bottle in Germany, in the museum in Speyer, and it's even got a bit of Roman wine in the bottom. But they would be very fragile and expensive things. So the arrival of the wine bottle, and even more important in a sense, the cork, was a big, big step. You couldn't keep wine before that. You only knew wine in its new form as the marvellous thing it can be, but it can't get more marvellous because you can't age it. So when the unknown hero who invented the corkscrew came along, that was a big, big moment. We don't know who it was. The first thing first known corkscrew was known as a bottle screw, and it turned up sometime in the as late as the 17th century, which is not very long ago when you think about it. So the possibility of wine improving with age changed not everything, but a lot. Up to that time, wine had really not had much of a rival. The distillation of spirits, which was a Arabic invention, we think originally, or possibly Chinese, didn't become possible or popular for a very long time. It was not till the Dutch started doing it in a big way, again in the 17th century, that there was that alternative to wine, because spirits would keep, and they'd give you a headache quicker. So in the 17th century, it was the age of exploration, of imports of rare goods and so on, and we came across wines from further away, sweeter wines. Wine came up against rival drinks, which had never had before. There was only beer, and beer wouldn't keep either. It was in the 17th century that, again, the Dutch, I think, started to use hops to preserve beer, and not everybody approved of giving a bitter taste to beer, but they gave it the possibility of a longer life. Remember that in the same era, we started to import, or the Spanish started to import chocolate from Mexico, and shortly after coffee from the Near East, and then along came tea, and what with distilled spirits, coffee, tea, chocolate, and better beer, wine had a tough time. And it wasn't sort of easy come, easy go. It was also, it had other disadvantages as far as we Brits were concerned. The good stuff was grown in France, and we didn't get along with the French. Not much has changed. But we didn't get along with the French. We were daggers drawn for century after century after century. So the government naturally discouraged us from drinking French wine and wanted us to drink wine from Spain and Portugal at different periods, which was not necessarily to our taste. And certainly not to the taste of the Scots, who had a particular love relationship with France. They wanted all the French wine they could get. Bordeaux was shipping a great deal to Leith, the port of Edinburgh, and there's a nice little ditty of that period, or maybe a little later. Firm and erect, the Highland chieftain stood. Sweet was his mutton, and his claret good. Thou shalt drink port, the English statesman cries. He drank the poison, and his spirit died. Now, I have other things I want to tell you besides that, but really, the first question that most people ask me when we meet is, how did you get into your job? Or, I want your job, actually, is a common remark. And it's quite true that when I started doing what I do, not many people did. There was a sort of school of wine writing. I'd never heard the expression wine writing in those early days, and nor do I like it at all, because we don't write wine, we write about wine. And so my job is up for grabs, everybody. I got it, I'll tell you how I got it, by sort of moving on a bit from travel writing. I can't read my writing, that's one of the... if you look at the little exhibit at the back of the room, which thrilled me, I must say, when I came in and saw that the archivists here have been scrabbling through my stuff and found some quite amusing little pieces. Well, there's a great deal people do not want to know, and one mustn't give them more than they want to know. That was a key writing point, but it leads to the thing that the writer must think, above all, who are you writing to? And I say to rather than for, because I always think of myself as writing to somebody. It's a sort of a letter to somebody who I vaguely know or I know something about. But that engagement, looking somebody in the eye and writing to them rather than writing for them, I think is a key to getting your books read. If you want to be read, it's no good just recording the minutes, as it were. The minutes have to give the sense of the meeting. They have to have the drama, if any, of what's going on in communication. If no drama, emotion, you hope that people will be, their feelings will be engaged, and it won't just be a recitative of the facts. The way that I approach it is by telling the story, because deep down I'm a historian, not a qualified historian, but it's always the background of things that really intrigues me. The more I learn about the history of California wine, the more wonderful it becomes to me. And there is much more to be discovered, I think, about the characters who set off here. And Axel was just telling me about Bodega Bay, which I always imagined was a big wine store, because apparently I was wrong about that. But everything is accompanied by feelings and desires, and especially wine. And we have, what other drink do you get so engaged with as a bottle of wine? It's absurd how much we record and need to know or can know about a bottle of wine. It used to be as vague as I was just saying, Bordeaux was Bordeaux. But now you get down to very small plots of land, and even in some rather absurd cases, even rows of vines, which have become people get so close into the subject that they want to know the very vine that made it. And it's true that the better the wine, the more specific one is about it. If you think about the world's most expensive wines, like Domaine La Romane Conti, you're actually talking about a very small area of land. It's not exactly your sort of backyard plot. It's a bit more than that. It's got to make a few thousand bottles before it becomes realistic. But still, the rarity is a great sales force, as we all know. And so is a reassuringly high price. So, it's a sad fact of the wine business, and not only the wine business, but if you can't sell it for $10, try 20. There are people out there who feel reassured. Now, the books that my big opportunity as a writer came when my publisher, James Mitchell, of the firm of Mitchell Beasley, which he started in 1969, and his the first book he published was, he did a very smart guy, he did a deal with NASA, the space agency, and he said, is anybody using your photographs? This was the moon, the first trip to the moon. And they said, well, hadn't thought of it. So he said, can I have them? And within less than a year after the moon landing, he had produced the Moon Atlas with all the NASA photographs. And that was smart publishing. And then he thought, what else might sell? Sex usually sells. Dirty pictures, terrific market in those. So he published a book called The Joy of Sex, which is one of the biggest sellers ever, full of naughty pictures and some useful tips as well. So he was becoming big internationally by this time. And this was my chance, because we were good friends anyway. And he said to me, Hugh, I've been talking to Philips, the Dutch map publishers, and they say, is there something in the idea of maps of wine? Because of all commodities, can you think of any other commodity whose price depends on where it comes from? Precisely. And I said, maps? You mean real maps? Like ordnance survey maps, accurate maps? He said, oh yeah. I said, do you know what that'll cost? He said, yes. I said, have you got £100,000 to put into it? He said, yes, we could do that, and hence the World Atlas of Wine. Because I said, these maps have got to be at least as good as the French state detail maps, the IGN, the Institut Géographique National of France, which is, the maps are perfect. And he said, well, yes, yeah. I said, well, nothing less will do. I don't want any little crossroads left out. I don't want any in the big scale maps like the ones of the Côte d'Or of Burgundy. I said people will want a picnic there in the vineyards. So let's put in the little walls and place, and they can look at the map and choose where they're going to have their picnic. And of course it came to life. Before that, even the best wine books, wine was a list of names. You know, you went up the Medoc and you had Margaux, Saint-Julien, Pauillac, Saint-Estèphe, blah, blah, blah. And down in the Côte d'Or, Gevrey Chambertin, Chambre-Musigny, Claude Vougeot, and so on. List of names. It's not grabbing, is it? If you're not there with the wines. So I said, but put them on a map and you've got a picture of the land. And people can dream their way through it. They can use it. It's very useful. And it's not just a picture of the land. You can start exploring and explaining the geology, the underlying geology, the inclinations to the south or east or west, the sunshine hours, all this kind of thing can be put in front of you. And it doesn't take a lot of wit to interpret those into the conditions that make different wines. And when you look around the world and see how different the world's vineyards are, and something up in Sonoma will have quite a different situation from some, well, I mean, I was thinking of northern Sonoma or Mendocino compared with Carneros, say. I mean, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? Just looking at the place, that the fruit is going to be different and the wine is going to be different and it's going to suit different grape varieties. And then a lot of time has to pass before the proof of the pudding emerges. You know, you have to try your vineyard for a long time before you know whether it was a good investment or not. So you could always nip down to the bookstore and buy a copy of the World Atlas of Wine and find out instantly whether it was a good idea. How do you make a living out of it? Think about writing about it. Well, as I said earlier, I mean, you either can put words together, or you can't. But you do it by amusing, if you possibly can. A joke is absolute gold dust. There are not many wine jokes, are there? Can anyone offer me a wine joke? Well, I always think of it, the activity is the thing that I look for. I always say that a verb is worth 3 or 4 adjectives. What's the wine doing in your mouth? You know, it may be reminding you of licorice and wildflowers and heaven knows what, but it's energizing. It has energy. Good wine has got energy. And in a way, the most basic, to me, one of the most basic criteria of, is this wine interesting, enjoyable, worth thinking about, worth talking about, worth writing about, is what it does in your mouth. How vital is it? How much actual kilojoules, or just little joules, of energy is it transmitting to your palate? The good ones, a great deal. Sometimes in obvious ways, sometimes in ways which are not very appealing. You know, raw tannin is not appealing at all, but it's vital and it's expressing itself strongly. In some wines you need to wait years for it to calm down. But I always think a good example is, who drinks Moselle these days? Beautiful Riesling, Northern Riesling, one of whose main attributes is its acidity. Well, the word acidity doesn't sort of turn you on particularly, does it? And yet it is the acidity which energizes you. It gets its energy across. And the magic of the kind of Moselle, light Moselles, not the big sweet ones, but the sort of cabinet wines and Spätlesers, is that you feel the sort of electrical currents between the acidity and the fruit and the sugar actually sort of playing off each other like electricity in your mouth. Now that is a tremendous attribute, and not every wine does that at all. But good wines tend to have different qualities that play off each other, producing sparks, and making that you can't ignore them. If the mark of a good wine is once you put it in your mouth, you keep it there, and well, first of all, of course, you have breathed it in, and then it will confirm or not confirm what you have experienced through your nostrils on your palate, and it will make its first impression. The word that a lot of us use about that is its attack. When it strikes you, does the later part of the taste confirm or contradict what you just experienced? And does it then go on and develop and do different things and throw off a little picture here, a little picture there? Does it affect different parts of your mouth in different ways? Do you feel it more on the top palate or in your cheeks, or best of all in your throat? And it goes slowly away, very, very slowly. So the French even use an expression for this and get out their stopwatches, because they call that the caudalie, from coda or cauda, a tail. And the tail of the wine, you measure the caudalies. How long? My goodness, it's still going on. Yeah, oh yes. It's got a way to go yet, yeah. Okay, it's got 10, 11, 12 caudalies. That was a good wine. Unless it was a disgusting one, of course. How many aspects, how many approaches to this rich subject are there? Because, as I said to someone, I think in my first book, I try to quote myself, wine takes you up into areas of knowledge and byways of knowledge and so on, which you'd never glimpse without, you'd never think about. The combinations of history, geography, the senses, all leading to a glorious glow in the end. I mean, what's not to like, really? That is the essence of my trade, and I was jolly lucky to sort of come across this idea so early in my life and find that there could be a living in it. You've got to find the right editor, and I've been very lucky in that too. So I think I've just about spilled the beans about my trade, and I've got a feeling that there might be other things that one or two of you might want to know.
Thank you so much, Hugh, for starting us off and that fantastic background in history. I have plenty of actually follow-up questions, certainly some to start with, but I also know that our audience does as well. So we will be, because it's being recorded, we'll pass the microphone so that everyone can hear if you have any questions. So yes, we have time for them and to kind of get us started. I wanted to ask you actually, as you're talking about the importance kind of maps and of picturing or visualizing wine, what are other techniques that you have used to help your readers picture wine besides maps?
Well, that's a lovely question, because musical people find all sorts of parallels between wine and music. And I've used that a little bit in some of my books. I said that I'm trying to think of the Bix Beiderbecke. You know, the trumpeter? Does that mean anything to you? Bix Beiderbecke? No, okay. Think of another trumpeter, jazz trumpeter, who really takes off into space with his ideas and his brassy solos. Because I've compared a wine to a trumpet solo, or indeed musical instruments. You know, there are bassoon wines too, definitely. And there are this kind of wine, you can imagine this, can't you? So in music I can see all sorts of parallels, but also in authors. I can think of a Dickensian wine. Can you think of a Dickensian wine? I think I'd better go back and work that one out for myself, don't you? In other words, because wine is so limited, or taste is so limited in its own vocabulary, as we all know, there are only 4 or 5 words about taste. You've got sweet, sour, salt, bitter, and after that you've got to elaborate, because you don't get very far just saying that. So then you are into the field of simile and metaphor, and you've got to find the images that will match the wine, and I've suggested 1 or 2. There is, of course, a school of thought which is very Davies, which is, was it Anne Noble who created the aroma wheel and everything, where you try to be precise with sensations, with smells and tastes, within a very organized structure, where you have the ones which are empyreumatic, something to do with burning. You have the ones which are earthy or flowery and so on, in categories, and then you can elaborate on that. You can organize, if you want, what your senses tell you. You can organize things into a whole great vocabulary, and you can apply that back to wine, and people do. And they very often get bogged down, I think. There was somebody called Robert Parker, who might ring a bell, who got deeply into describing wines, in over his head, I think, really, with first of all the grapefruit salad as a starting point. You know, this wine is. There's grapefruit, mango, a little bit of banana, and so on. And then you put these together in your head and think, that ain't wine. What are other favourite schools of wine description? My favourite, and the one which is frowned on now, deeply frowned on, sadly, is the anthropomorphic one, where wines are compiled with people. I think possibly it is totally banned these days. Is it so unwoke that I can't even talk about it? But you know, there are wines that are like lovely girls, and wines that are like great muscle men, and old ladies, and so on. Well, that is actually, that expresses quite a lot. Maybe too much, I don't know. But that, I think, the comparison with people, it could be just classes of people, ages of people, even colours of people, or individuals. And you say, well, this one is this is a Mr. Pickwick of a wine. Doesn't that say, can you sort of think of a Mr. Pickwick wine? Yeah? Or some other character that we think we all know. I'm not sure about a Macbeth wine. I don't think I would hesitate to drink that. But it's quite fun too, as another sort of train of thought you might engage, because wine does actually eventually make you tipsy, and the tipsier you are, the more you're going to find things to talk about and to compare it with. There's no point in ignoring that aspect of wine either. My own taste is for wine with the lowest reasonable amount of alcohol. I mean, I think that a good red Bordeaux, for example, if it strays over about 13% alcohol, it begins to taste a little too hot, fiery, self-important, all sorts of things it might be. Whereas keeping the alcohol level as moderate as you can gives you more access to the flavors. They don't get clouded out. So I very rarely really enjoy a wine above about the natural table wine above about 14%. Trouble is that there are not many wines that aren't 14% now. You can blame global warming or what you like, or you can blame Robert Parker, who always marked up the stronger wines. If you're going down a tasting bench and you've got 18 wines to taste, and you sniff and suck, spit, the ones that are going to make the most impression, no doubt, are the stronger ones. Alcohol just hits you, and I find a very useful way of comparing wines when it comes to a set of wines that one is, say you want to choose one to buy or something, and you're lucky enough to have the open bottles and the glasses of samples in front of you. I line up the glasses in front of the bottles, and I go down the line and I sniff, and then at that point I think, well, I believe I might really like that. Smells interesting, charming, lovely, whatever it is. So I will maybe just bring the glass a little bit towards me, and then another one that I don't think I'm going to enjoy very much, push the glass a little bit back. And so this is without any scoring notes or anything like that. I hate scores. I have a real problem with numbers. I've no idea what a 100-point wine could possibly mean. I mean, how can a wine be perfect? But what is perfect? No. That's not what appreciation is. So I have formed my little sort of diagram of wines that are getting closer to the front, and ones that are getting nearer the back, and within half an hour the job's done. I've made my choice. I think that is a practical lesson in appreciation. As for scoring, which is, in the wine trade, it's universal. I mean, everybody has to put a score on something. The 100-point score system, Parker system, I think is really a bit of a busted flush now. Does anyone still use it? I'm not sure. I don't think so. The British wine trade, when they have used scores at all, they've normally scored out of either 20 or something like 3 or 5. I'm a great one for the scoring out of 3. And the way it goes, if I must give a score, is either thumbs up or thumbs down or a question mark. Because that covers everything, really, doesn't it? Yes. Does anyone have a comment to make at this stage?
Hugh, I wonder if you could talk about the first visits to Bordeaux and the first visits to California, and perhaps tell us about things you may not have written about, like who were the people who you met who most memorable that you keep coming back to when you go to Bordeaux and you keep coming back to whenever you come to California? Who are those people?
Well, I first came to the Napa Valley, in fact, in about 1973, I think it was, which was a different world. It really was a different world. The only restaurant in the Napa Valley was the Grapevine Inn, and they would burn a hamburger for you as quick as anything. So you went to my introduction was through Wine Institute, and I was very, very lucky because the guide that they allotted to me was Bob Thompson. So I was young and he was young, and we drove around together discovering things. He knew quite a lot more than I did. I mean, obviously he living in San Francisco. And we shared appreciation and discovered so many things, met so many people who are either legends, like, for example, Andrei Chelistchev at BV, or in a very different league. Brother Timothy of the Christian Brothers. Christian Brothers is sort of, I don't know whether they're still in business. They're not, no, but it was a sort of fringe Christian order with a kind of monastery place up towards Sonoma. Can't exactly remember where it was. Yeah, and Brother Timothy was lovely. He was a true Christian, and he was patient and explained beautifully. He was crystal clear about things and a great charmer. He was one of my sort of favorite introductions to the region. Andrei Chelistchev was a wonderful character. I expect a lot of us here knew him or met him. But the thing that struck me when I first went to his winery was that it was all deeply secret. Nowadays, you know, the PR person wants you to know absolutely every last detail. In those days, I don't know, it was behind the door. You never discover what the secret was, but it turned out to be damn good wine. It was a different world then. It was just other people we met early on. Joe Heitz was one, that's a mad eccentric, who had just spent, he was the guy, in my view, who actually realized what oak would do to Chardonnays and Cabernets. Because, the name of the winery in Sonoma, Hansel. At Hansel, they had invested in Burgundy casks because they'd rumbled the fact that a lot of the taste of great Burgundies is the taste of oak. I don't think anyone in the British wine trade, or let alone, I don't know, anywhere, had actually put two and two together and said, actually, what I'm tasting is Chardonnay and oak, and mainly oak. That was the big difference. Well, Hansel, who was actually run by an English woman, Barbara, anyway, I think they packed up or sold up, and Joe Heitz came along and bought the barrels, and it clicked with him. The penny dropped. That this is where the mysterious French-type flavors are coming from. Now, this is not long ago. This is 1959 or something like that. And that was absolute revolution. And of course, as soon as the penny did drop, people started to spend far too much on barrels. And so there came a long, long period when aspirational wine was terribly over oaky. And I remember opening, something haunts me. I think it was a restaurant in Chicago. We opened a bottle of Chardonnay, and I sent it straight back. It was one of the more expensive bottles. And I said, I can't drink this. And I said to the sommelier, you smell this. What are you smelling? Oh, he said, I think I see what you mean. It just was like a carpenter's shop. And if it smells like that, it tastes like that too. Uh, so, so there was a period when aspirational wineries really way overdid the oak. And what goes around comes around. And now a lot of the finest wines bear no trace of oak at all. We had a lovely bottle of Chardonnay in San Francisco yesterday, which clearly had never seen a chip of oak, and it was in itself, it was ripe enough, it was beautifully balanced, it spoke about more than just grape, it was wine. And oh dear, we're in deep waters here, because wine is grape juice, but when it ferments, it becomes wine, and it's something else, and which can go many different ways. But when when that miracle has gone the right way, as it did in this Chardonnay, I think, gosh, that couldn't be improved. It doesn't need age, it doesn't need oak, it doesn't need anything. It's a lovely balance of sweet fruit, acidity, and that sort of wininess, vinosity, for which we really have a very poor vocabulary, I think.
So, sorry, I'm standing up, just in case we think we're in San Francisco or Chicago. Since you've been talking, I was going to see if I can get the UC Davis logo back up here. In addition to having other questions, though, I do want to particularly invite, if there are any students here who have questions, to please also let us know. We would love to hear them from you. But is there anyone else who has questions in the audience?
Hi. Which one of these? All right. I'm a grad student here, and one of the things I'm really interested in is sort of the generation of new climate-resistant varieties. And one question I had for you, and really everyone who has much more appreciation of wine than I do from a chronological scale, is any varieties, styles that you can't really find anymore. Things that, now we can only find in writing.
Oh, many, many. I'm not quite sure. Could you possibly interpret that a little for me? Because I am hard of hearing.
Yeah. Basically, yeah, just varieties, styles that have disappeared that you are wistful for.
Oh, I see. Ones that have fallen off. Oh, that's a lovely question. I've never been asked that before. Wines that I miss. Well, different periods in the development of wines that we know very well. And I think, well, what a pity nobody makes it like that anymore. There are instances of that, definitely. And think of makers around here. There was a time when I just loved the Louis Martini Cabernets, for example. There was a sort of Napa Cab in those days, which was not over anything. It was just a beautifully harmonious wine, which did need age. I mean, of his Cabernets of the 50s and even the 40s had a lightness of touch and a sort of penetrating potential, which I think I haven't seen recently. Maybe I haven't gone to the right address, but so yes, there are certainly things that have gone by and that one regrets. But on the whole, wine has been getting so much better that's the wrong way of looking at it.
So Hugh, I want to ask you about writing. I have a couple of questions. One is, you said that you're really a writer first who happened to end up writing about wine, right? It was not accident, but, not a design intent of yours. And I'm wondering, so first question is, should anybody aspire to be a wine writer? Does that even make sense? And what kind of background would they need today to be a good wine writer? That's question one. And question two, which I can remind you later, is if you hadn't chosen wine to write about, what would you write about?
Well, question two is easy because I do write about lots of other things. I mean, wine is not my whole career. And in particular, I said how I wrote a lot about travel, but I've become specialized in plants. I mean, specifically trees. I wrote a book about trees, my first book, a long, long time ago. I mean, not long after my World Atlas of Wine was because my publisher said to me, "Oh, Hugh, that was a big success. Thank you for that. That's great. We're going to sell lots of those. So what's next?" And I said, "Trees." And he said, "Cheese, that's terrific. It goes with wine perfectly." But I didn't say cheese, and I did write a book about trees. I felt that these gloriously beautiful things of giving us their shade and, they're part of everybody's life. And people don't look at them. I mean, even people in the room, all you very, very sensitive, savvy people in the room, could you name what the street trees are in this street or the next street? Have you actually appreciated them? Have you looked at their qualities or cursed their frailties? I don't think people do look at trees, and so that was, for my rather kind of slightly analytical kind of mind, it was a subject that was just waiting to be done. I do love lists, mind you. I just love lists. My little annual pocket wine book is a great big list. I love the alphabet, If we didn't have the alphabet, how would we do it? And this is why the Chinese have an awful problem translating my pocket books, because they don't have an alphabet. So they have to re-edit it into bits. That was one of the questions.
That was the second question. The first was, would you advise people to become wine writers now, and what would you advise them to learn to be good at it?
Poetry. Really play with words, make words mean something to you deep down inside. Find out what words can do. I mean, read poetry and write poetry, but mainly read it. Shakespeare. I think actually Shakespeare is a key. If you read a lot of Shakespeare, you're not going to write dull stuff, are you?
So, follow-up question, if I might. Do you think that a good wine writer today needs to know a lot about wine? Do they need to be an MW or something like that?
Well, to know a lot. I mean, you could know everything and still not be a good writer. I can think of one or two examples. I think you've got to know about yourself and your own reactions. You've got to understand wine in your own terms to be convincing. So it's not the quantity of knowledge at all. You can always, I mean, nowadays, what's the point of a reference book when everything is on the internet? Everything. You can borrow anyone's opinion or steal it. Everything's available. It's a question of putting it together and personalizing it.
Hi. I'm just curious if there are any resources out there for, say, young wine enthusiasts. For example, like Madeleine Pouquet, who's done a good job at, with Wine Folly and drawing visualizations for people already interested in wine. But are there any writers or resources out there for people that are trying to bring wine to that younger generation and bring it in a way that is relevant to them?
Well, I'm sure there are many. I'm thinking of wine courses and things like that. I mean, there are many good teachers who you can learn from. there are more and more videos and that kind of thing. I think you have to teach yourself about wine in a sense that if you've only ever drunk one wine, what do you know? If you've tasted two wines, then you've got a basis for comparison. You can, you like one more than the other, or can say that one is sharper than the other. When you've got three wines, then you've got some decisions to take, and you've got some comments to make. But these two are more similar than the third one, or however you break it up. So it's a question of experience, and it's a question of thinking about it. I mean, I've always said that you can't learn anything about wine until you really taste it. And I don't mean taste it in the technical way. I mean, hold it in your mouth and think about it. I've known plenty of people who will be offered a most lovely glass of wine, and they'll say, "Oh, that's jolly kind. I've seen the label. My goodness, that is very kind." And then they will, cheers, take a sip, almost instantly swallow it, and then start talking about some other subject. You've got to give your concentration to it. I mean, that is, without giving it a moment of thought, more than a moment of thought, I mean a minute of thought, you'll never find out or be able to remember what it was. So I think pay attention is rule one. Was there another rule? That's the rule.
As a little bit of a follow-up to that, I was wondering, if you're thinking the question about how to reaching kind of younger audiences in a relevant way, it's making me think of, back here on the table, we have a copy of your pop-up book that, is very kind of whimsical and dynamic. Can you tell a little bit about how did you think of creating and writing a pop-up book back in 1989? What was the origin of that as a way of, rethinking how to write about or visualize, kind of picture wine?
Well, it's a very simple answer. I met a character in a trade known as paper engineering, and he was just producing pop-up books about anything. And I said, well, no, he said, could we do a wine one? And I said, well, why not? There's not many things that pop, but what I wanted to do was one with landscapes of wine. If you could pop up the Napa Valley or the Douro or something like that, it could be very graphic. But when we tried doing that, actually, they were kind of boring. You couldn't up them enough to be dramatic, so it all looked a bit flat. So we thought, well, there are other aspects of it and turned the whole thing into a big joke, really, which is what that is. Funnily enough, the people who find the joke funniest are the Germans. They sell more copies of that book than anyone else, and it's called, in German, it's called Johnson's Weintheater. It's a big seller.
Are there other questions? Great.
Hi, I'm a graduate student in viticulture and enology. So my question is, I also hold different version of the World Atlas of Wine, and I can see part of Asia, especially China and Japan, the pages are increasing. So I am curious about your opinion about the future of China and Japan, not only as a wine consuming country, but also as a wine making country, especially consider England is also they produce boutique sparkling wine, if I'm correct. So yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Yes, well, that's very interesting. I don't think I heard everything you said because I'm hard of hearing, but the appreciation of wine in China, and which has always surprised me, I must say, because years ago I used to go to the Far East quite a lot to sell or help sell Hennessy cognac and Moet and Chandon champagne. I had a consultancy with Moet Hennessy, and traveled quite a lot, and realized that what the grape wine, our kind of wine, was a novelty in China. Although when we went round the National Museum of China in Taipei, one of the main exhibits there is bronze wine vessels. So, I mean, wine was obviously a very important part of culture in ancient China, but I understood that it was rice wine. And then, I'm trying to remember when the first shipments, because I was connected through Moet Hennessy's office in Hong Kong and went to China a bit, I thought, well, there's a mismatch here with Chinese food. We have a sort of, it's built into the presumption that there are white foods for which there's white wine, there's red foods for which there's red wine, and as simple as that. And that in general, we take one course after another. We have fish, then we have meat, and it simplifies the whole thing. You have a white wine, and a red wine. And then when you sit down at a Chinese banquet, there's no preordained order, and people are all eating different dishes as they go around at the same time. So how do you make out a wine list for that? And I talked to a lot of people and said, is this really possible? And they said, well, yes, you just put red and white wine on the table and let people sip it as they like. And I said, well, can you drink red wine with white wine? Oh, yes, they said, it goes fine. And then I was, I'd had a tasting in Shanghai not many years ago. And it was a big round table, beautifully presented. And I had the prettiest little woman I've ever seen sitting on she was dressed in sort of a marvelous fawn suede suit. I can picture it now. She was the editor of Chinese Vogue. And after we'd tasted quite a few champagnes, she turned to me and she says, please, Mr. Johnson, why does this wine have bubbles? We Chinese don't like bubbles. I said, do you drink Coca-Cola? Yes. But so that's the depth of my experience. All I know is that wine has become so big in China that we're going to run out of some of the good stuff at home. Chateau Lafite in particular. Now, why Chateau Lafite? Somebody said to me, well, we all know what fit means. It's a wine that makes you fit. That's why it's called Lafite. Yeah?
Are there other questions? We have an additional one in the back, which is how many wines do you think that you have tasted in your lifetime? And is there one, so that's the first question, standalone. And then the second, is there one that is particularly memorable?
Oh. They're all memorable in their different ways. No, how many, I have no idea. I mean, if you could take a day rate or a week rate, I mean, I suppose I've been doing it for 50 years or more like 60 now. And I can't do the math, but and let's say I just taste a wine a day. Let's suppose they're all different. How many days have I been in? Oh, I can't do it. A lot. A lot. And as for memorable, it's very often a personal connection. In fact, this is, to me, an important point. When you look at a wine list, say you're in a restaurant, it's got a good wine list, and you're undecided, and you have a friend with you who's quite curious to know what you're going to pick, I look at the list and I look for connections. I don't say, oh, I think the 1989 La Mission Aubryon is going to suit our menu better than the 1988 or something. I don't look at it that way at all. I think, oh, I know somebody who I know the owner, or I know somebody who has been there. I've got some personal connection, because that is more important than the flavour of the wine. It's the emotion, the connection you bring to it.
Thank you. I actually have a follow-up to that too, but from the writing side, do you, in addition to tasting, do you write every day?
No longer, I think, probably is the answer. I spend a lot of the time, what I do write most days is my garden diary, which isn't really a diary at all. But for the last 44 years or something, I've had a column which is formerly known as Tredescant's Diary. Tredescant was one of the first known English gardeners. He was a gardener to King James I, and his name is sort of stuck as a gardener's name because nobody else has ever heard of anyone with the name Tredescant. And so when I wanted to write an editorial, I used to edit the garden magazine for the Royal Horticultural Society, and I decided it should have a personal column, start with some sort of personal thoughts, and I thought, what name could I use? There's a very famous column in our Sunday Times called Atticus, and nobody knew who Atticus was. Some Roman, I suppose. But Atticus stuck as the name of this column. So I said, I'm going to look for a name which doesn't belong to anybody, but seems to mean something to do with the subject. I came across Tredescant, and it, over the years, has got shortened to Trad, and so I am endlessly, daily almost, writing Trad's Diary, which is online, which you can find me and my recent thoughts very easily. Just put in Trad's Diary and you've got 40 odd years worth of gardening stuff.
Thank you. We have time for one last question, if anyone in the audience has one. Good. Well, Hugh, I want to say on behalf of the UC Davis Library, and here particularly, for archives and special collections, we are so thrilled and appreciative to have you back and for your time today, your generosity, your fantastic advice, as well as humor. And so thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Lastly, I do want to say on your way out, if you didn't have time on your way in, to please take a look at the pop-up exhibit of some of the materials from Hugh's archive Hugh's collection that are on the table in the back. It's a really fun and delightful kind of trip down, I think, some memory lane. So thank you.